I never meant to kill anyone, not at first, not when I was still clinging to the idea that maybe, just maybe, she'd come back through the door one day with that sheepish look she used to wear after a fight, that half smile that said, I overreacted, without her needing to say a word, the same smile that made me believe in something like forgiveness, or fate, or at the very least a version of love that didn't leave teeth marks behind. But that hope rotted fast, just like everything else in this goddamn apartment, starting with the smell that began to crawl out from the walls sometime around the third week she was gone, a smell like mildew mixed with copper, like something wounded had died behind the drywall and no one was brave enough to dig it out. I stayed in bed a lot after she left. At first out of grief, sure, but then out of necessity, because I couldn't move without hearing her voice behind me, breathing in syllables that didn't belong to memory but came slithering up from the baseboards, from the electric outlets, from the godforsaken red wallpaper she picked out one spring morning when we were still pretending this place was a home, and not a mausoleum for everything we used to be. The wallpaper was always strange. Too textured, too red, like dried blood pressed into paper and lacquered over. But I let her choose it because I wanted her to feel like the place was hers, like she could root herself here and not wander off again like she used to do in the early days when commitment made her itch. And at first I thought maybe I was just seeing things, maybe the lines and shapes only looked like veins and arterial branches because I was spiraling, because I was alone and broken and sleep deprived, but then the shape started to move. I'd lie in bed at night, covers pulled up to my chin, staring at the wall as the pattern shimmered just beneath the surface like something alive, like the wallpaper was breathing, pulsing, undulating with a rhythm too steady to be an illusion and too grotesque to be man-made, and sometimes, just as I was drifting off, I'd hear it, her voice, faint and sharp as a razor, whispering, you can bring me back, if you feed the wall. At first I laughed, or tried to. Because that's what grief does, it makes you hear things, see things, cling to scraps of the person you lost until those scraps cut deep enough to draw blood. But the thing is, I never told anyone about the whispers, about the way the wall pulsed like a heartbeat, about the face that began to bulge out from behind the wallpaper on the 23rd night, her face, pressed and screaming behind the blood-red pattern like a wasp trapped under skin, mouthing words I couldn't hear but could feel in my bones. And then the cat died. Not our cat, she took the damn cat when she left. But the one that always lingered outside the window, the stray with the torn ear that I sometimes fed scraps to, the one that hissed at everyone else but never me, and when I opened the door that morning and found it there, stiff and broken with its spine twisted the wrong way and its gut smeared across my welcome mat like finger paint, I swear to Christ I heard the wallpaper purr, low and wet and satisfied. I cleaned it up, of course, I'm not a psychopath, not yet. And told myself it was just a raccoon, or maybe some sick kid with a BB gun and a twisted sense of humor, but that night the wall pulsed harder than before, a slow throb I could feel through the mattress, and the whisper came back louder this time, hungry, that was good, more. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't blink. I just sat on the edge of the bed, watching the face in the wall stretch and grin, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace, like direction, like purpose. Because if there was even a sliver of a chance that I could bring her back, that I could feel her warmth again or hear her humming from the bathroom sink while she clipped her nails or read shampoo bottles out loud in a fake British accent, I'd do whatever it took, no matter how many bodies it cost. And wouldn't you know it, the wallpaper whispered again before dawn, guiding me to the old hammer in the toolbox, whispering a name I hadn't heard in months. Derek, the guy she left me for, the guy who smiled like he had my whole life in his teeth, the guy whose address I still had saved in my phone beneath the name Homewrecker. Tomorrow, I'll pay him a visit. Tomorrow, I'll start building her a way back through the wall. Tomorrow, I'll feed it something fresh. I barely slept the night before, not because I was afraid of what I was about to do, no, that part had already sunk into my bones like marrow, natural, inevitable. But because the wallpaper wouldn't stop pulsing, and every time I closed my eyes I could hear it slurping, like it was digesting the cat still, licking the bones clean inside the wall, each moist sound vibrating through the floorboards with a hunger that no sane man would ever try to interpret, but I wasn't sane anymore, not after watching her face stretch through red vinyl like it was trying to be born again, not after she smiled at me. I didn't even need a plan for Derek, not really. He was stupid, smug, and soft, always trying to grow that ridiculous beard like he was some kind of lumberjack while working a tech support job in an air-conditioned office, and I knew from the way she talked about him, like he was some gentle alternative to my intensity, that he wouldn't see it coming, especially not when I rang his doorbell wearing her favorite coat. The one with the missing button and the little coffee stain on the cuff, the one I told her I burned but never actually did. Because I liked how it still smelled like her wrists and lavender lotion and the way her hair always stayed wet longer than it should have. He answered the door like I knew he would, cocky and confused, stepping out onto the porch with his eyebrows raised and his phone half out of his pocket like he was ready to call the cops, like he thought that would save him, but I smiled and said, "I just want to talk," and when he said, "You need to leave," I pulled the hammer from behind my back and swung it into his mouth before he could scream. There was this sound when the hammer hit, not the crunch of bone like in the movies, but this wet snap, like biting into a soft apple and hitting something rotten at the core, and his teeth went flying. At least 3 of them I saw skitter down the porch steps like bloody dice, while he stumbled back into the doorframe, gasping, choking, gurgling something wet and stupid as he tried to shove me away with hands that shook too much to be useful. I hit him again. And again. And again. I hit him until his face wasn't a face anymore but a red smear with fragments sticking out at odd angles, like someone tried to mold clay with a garbage disposal, and when he finally dropped to the floor, twitching like roadkill, I dragged him back inside with the same kind of calm you use when cleaning a spilled drink, just a bit of a mess, nothing we can't fix. Only now there was a trail of blood stretching from his doorway to the living room carpet, like a ribbon unfurled in celebration, and the smell was already seeping into the air like copper and hot pennies. He was still breathing, somehow, mouth foaming, eyes rolling. When I stood over him, listening to the sound of the wallpaper whispering all the way from home, growing louder with each pump of blood from his split-open head, and I remember looking down and wondering if he knew, if he could tell in those final moments that he was just the first course, that his body wasn't going to a landfill or a shallow grave but somewhere sacred, somewhere holy, somewhere with red walls and a face that smiled just for me. Getting him into the trunk was harder than I expected, not because of the weight, but because part of his skull had caved in and kept catching on the lip of the bumper, dragging little smears of brain matter across my license plate like frosting. And the whole drive home I kept glancing into the rearview mirror like I expected to see her face again, not the dead one on my back seat, but hers, my love, my reason, my resurrection, but the mirror stayed stubbornly blank, except for the way the shadows behind me seemed to dance in time with the throbbing ache in my chest. I parked in the alley behind the apartment and used the side door to sneak him in, carrying him down to the basement one stair at a time, grunting, sweating, smiling, because every step closer to the red wallpaper was a step closer to getting her back, and when I finally reached the bottom and laid him out across the concrete, the light above flickered once, twice, and then stayed steadily on, like it was watching, like it approved. The wall hadn't moved yet, not fully. But it shimmered, the same way heat rises off pavement, and I could feel it waiting, expectant, hungry in a way that made my teeth itch and my spine go stiff, and when I dragged Derek's body across the floor and pressed his ruined face against the red pattern, I swear I saw the wallpaper twitch, as if 1,000 tiny mouths opened beneath the surface, whispering all at once in the voice I missed the most, more. It wasn't enough, I realized. It wasn't just about Derek, it wasn't about punishment or revenge, it was about offering, about rebuilding her from the blood up, piece by piece, flesh by flesh, and one broken body wouldn't be enough to stitch her smile back together or curl her fingers the right way or give her back the laugh that used to wake me up before my alarm ever had to. No, I'd need more. I'd need different pieces. And the wall. The wall was just getting started. I didn't expect Derek to still be breathing when I went down to check on him the next morning, but there he was. Gurgling softly through what remained of his lips, head cocked at an angle that looked like someone had tried to twist it off halfway and then changed their mind, one eye sagging like a deflated balloon, the other staring up at the water-stained ceiling as if he was still waiting for someone to tell him what was happening, to explain why the world had suddenly turned red in teeth and agony. It was almost beautiful, really. Like watching a man die in slow motion while the air between us shimmered with purpose, like something holy was taking root in that concrete slab of a basement, and I knelt beside him and pressed my hand to his chest to feel the flutter of life still rattling in there, weak and wet and wonderful. He tried to speak. I leaned in close to hear it, my ear brushing his blood-slicked cheek, his breath fogging weakly against my neck. And what came out of his throat was not a word but a prayer, a bubbling, pathetic moan that I interpreted as begging, though I couldn't be sure whether he was pleading for life or death or something in between, because even in that mangled state, even with the pieces of his face turning gray around the edges, he knew what was coming. I whispered back to him. I told him it was for her. I told him he should be honored. I told him he was the first of many. And I meant every word. I laid him flat on the plastic sheeting I had spread out across the floor, the same kind you see in crime scene dramas, only mine was creased and stiff from being stored too long in the hall closet behind the vacuum she always said was haunted because it moved once on its own while she was sleeping. The moment I pressed the blade into his side, just under the lowest rib, slow and sure and shaking with the kind of anticipation that made my teeth grind involuntarily, he let out a sound I can only describe as wet thunder, like someone was screaming through a collapsed lung, and I watched his legs twitch as if they were trying to remember how to run, poor things. The blood didn't spray like in the movies. It oozed, hot and syrupy, and the smell filled the basement like a church of rot, the coppery perfume of something ancient waking up behind the wall, and the wallpaper pulsed again, a slow throb like it was breathing with me, through me, because when I peeled the first layer of skin away and saw the muscle twitch underneath, I swear to God I heard her giggle, low, right behind my ear, like she used to when she snuck up behind me and whispered nonsense while I brushed my teeth. He was still trying to talk, the stubborn bastard. Even after I opened his belly and let his intestines spill out like party streamers. Even after I used the claw side of the hammer to rip out his molars, because I needed the roots, the wall had said so, and stuffed them one by one into the hole where the cat had died, where the floorboards now had a growing wet spot that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. Even after I cracked open his sternum and saw his trembling little heart still ticking away like it didn't know it was lost. I was crying, I think. Not out of pity. Not guilt. No, I was crying because she was coming back. I could feel it. The way the air thickened like syrup, the way the red wallpaper started to bulge outward, pressing shapes into the room like a fetus pushing out against the womb, and one of the shapes had her fingers. Long and delicate and slightly crooked at the knuckle where she broke it falling off the back porch that one Halloween, and it waved at me. Waved. I wanted to keep going, wanted to flay Derek down to the bone and feed each piece into the growing mouth that now yawned between the seams of the wallpaper, wet and pink and twitching, but something changed in that moment. He spoke. Clearer than before. Like something was speaking through him. He looked up at me with what remained of his face and smiled, his voice hoarse but somehow strong enough to say, "You'll never get her back, you only get what the wall wants." I dropped the scalpel. The wall shuddered. The light flickered off. And the basement went cold. That's when I heard it, a second voice, not hers, not his, but something lower, older, deeper, like stone being crushed under pressure, and it whispered a name I didn't recognize, Casilda. I stared at the wallpaper as it moved again, as more faces began to push against the surface, not just hers anymore, but strangers, smiling, frowning, screaming, dying, and I realized something I hadn't wanted to consider until now. The wall wasn't just feeding. It was collecting. I didn't sleep after Derek stopped breathing. After his heart finally gave out, not from the blood loss, not from the trauma, not even from the precise way I peeled the skin from his throat like opening a zipper, but from fear, the kind that settles into a man's ribcage like mildew, the kind that roots and flowers and blooms into something alive, because that wall, that goddamned wall, wouldn't stop moving. It had calmed a bit when he died. When his mouth sagged open, pink bubbles forming and popping across the remnants of his lips like some grotesque goodbye, but I knew it wasn't satisfied, because I could see the wallpaper still breathing in that slow, heaving way, as if it were digesting, processing, trying to make room for something else behind it. Something bigger. I wrapped Derek's remains in thick black garbage bags, 5 in total. One for the limbs, one for the torso, one for the head, one for the organs and mess I couldn't identify, and the last one for what I had taken as souvenirs, because the wall whispered sometimes that it wanted offerings in between feedings, little tokens, like his fingernails and his left eye, and who was I to say no when she was so close to coming home? And I stacked them neatly in the garage freezer like frozen leftovers waiting to be remembered. The basement, though. That fucking basement. It smelled like rust and vinegar and something sweet, like fruit left to rot in the sun until it turned to syrup, and the wallpaper, always that goddamn wallpaper, was now slick to the touch, no longer dry and dusty like old paper but damp, spongy, fever-warm, and if I pressed my hand to it for too long I could feel a heartbeat. Not mine. Not Derek's. Something deeper. Older. I started spending nights down there, listening. Not doing anything. Not killing. Just sitting in the basement chair I had dragged from the dining room, the one she used to sit in during dinner when she'd hum songs she never remembered the lyrics to, and I'd stare at the wall for hours while the thing inside it whispered in words I didn't understand, except sometimes. One of the voices sounded just like her, just like Molly, like she was trapped on the other side and laughing, not in fear but in delight, like the way she used to laugh when she saw something awful on the news and said, "Well, I guess some people really do belong in hell." And I'd laugh too. Because I was beginning to understand what that meant. You see, when I killed Derek, it wasn't just his body that bled, it was mine, too. Something inside me cracked, like a seam bursting open beneath pressure I didn't know I'd been under, and now I could feel things I never felt before, not just emotions or instincts, but flavors of fear, textures of grief, like Derek's dying had carved out a hole in me that let in something raw, wet, other. That's when I started to dream of her. Not the old her, not the living, laughing, slightly bored Molly who used to tap her fingers against the steering wheel while waiting at red lights, but a newer version, one made of shadow and silk, with too many teeth and fingers that trailed smoke, and when I'd wake from these dreams, I'd find myself standing in the basement again, in front of the wall, with my hands bloody and my mouth full of hair I didn't remember eating. The dreams weren't dreams. They were instructions. That's how I found the notebook, hidden in the air vent behind the furnace, where the wall told me to look, and inside were names. 15 of them. Each with an address. Each with a date. Each with a reason. I didn't write it. But the handwriting looked like mine. The first name, Sasha Hartwell. The woman who stood behind us in line at the movie theater the night we saw The Babadook, the one who spilled her soda and laughed too loud and looked at me like she wanted to peel me open with her eyes. Molly hated her. I remembered that. And the wall did, too. When I knocked on Sasha's door, she didn't recognize me. Of course she didn't. It had been 6 years. But she invited me in, told me I looked familiar, offered me wine like we were old friends. She didn't even scream when I drove the ice pick through the underside of her jaw. She just twitched. Like a puppet. By the time she hit the floor, I was already sawing at her ankles with a pocket knife, trying to keep the tendons intact like the notebook said. The wall likes complete sets. I bagged what I could. Left the rest for the police. They'd think it was random. A robbery. Maybe some incel who hated women. They wouldn't connect it to Derek. They wouldn't trace it back to the basement. They wouldn't find the room beneath the room, the one the wall opened for me when I returned with Sasha's tongue and placed it inside the hole where the cat used to sleep. The new room was longer, deeper, filled with things I didn't remember owning. Photographs of strangers posed in front of Molly's grave, bundles of teeth tied together with red string, and a mirror that didn't show my reflection, only hers, swaying in a red dress that glistened like raw meat. I dropped to my knees. She whispered to me. She said, "You're almost there, darling." And I believed her. The 15th name was crossed out before I even read it. Not by me. Not by a pen. It looked like it had been burned straight through the page, as if someone had pressed a branding iron onto the paper, leaving a blackened hole where a life used to be, and when I held the notebook up to the basement light, I saw that the ash had formed into symbols, curling and ancient, the same ones that began to appear in the corners of the basement every time I brought another offering, drawn in flies and mold and things that wriggled when I stared too long. The room beneath the room had grown, spreading like a rot, carving tunnels under the foundation and into me, until I no longer knew which bones were mine and which belonged to the house. I stopped leaving. Stopped pretending. The mask I wore for the world, grocery store trips, polite nods, shallow breath and small talk, it crumbled after number 12. Her name was Charlotte, and she cried the whole time, even when I held her and whispered how important she was, how necessary, how she would bring Molly back, because by then I had stopped pretending Molly was ever dead. She was becoming. Through blood, through ritual, through the slow, methodical unmaking of every person who had ever laughed at us, flirted with us, ignored us, judged us, witnessed us. And with each offering, the wall grew warmer. It began to sing. By number 14, I could no longer tell if the wall was inside the basement or inside my lungs, because every time I exhaled I could hear her whisper my name, not the name my mother gave me, not the name the police reports would eventually print, but the name Molly used to breathe into my neck when the lights were off and she wanted to pretend she didn't want it as much as I did. Casilda. She said it again and again, like a secret too heavy for sunlight. That was the name I used when I carved the 15th into the concrete floor. Not a person. Not a body. A gate. It wasn't just about blood. It was about location. About intention. About willingness to become the knife instead of just holding it. I peeled back the wallpaper one final time and the wall opened. Not like a door, but like a wound, slick and gaping and pulsing with lightless hunger, and behind it was Molly, finally returned, standing naked and wrong, her limbs bending in places they never had before, her mouth too wide, her hair moving on its own. She looked at me with a love I never deserved. And she said, "It's time. Time to open the mirror. Time to let her in fully. Time to become her bride." So I took the knife, the same one I'd used on the Hartwell woman, the same one Derek choked on while I sang to him, and I carved the mask from my face, strip by strip, until nothing remained of the man I had been, until I could hear the wall clapping, cheering, rejoicing, because now I was hers, and she was real, and forever, and hungry. I stepped through the wound. I left this world behind. But I'll tell you this, I'm not the only one. There are others. Some of them are already listening. Some of them have basements, too. Some of them are peeling back their wallpaper right now, looking for their own Molly, their own Casilda, their own God behind the God. So the next time you hear something scratching behind your walls at night, or a voice calling your name from the floorboards, or your dog starts growling at a spot in your house that's always just a little colder, don't look. Don't you dare look. Because she's here now. And Casilda is coming for you next.